The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Cresthaven Community Bank, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Marcus Aldridge pushed through the heavy glass doors, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the September heat outside. He wore a faded denim jacket over a plain gray shirt, his jeans worn but clean, his work boots scuffed from years of honest labor. At 47, his face carried the weathered lines of someone who had seen more than most, though his eyes remained steady and calm. The bank hummed with quiet activity. Customers stood in orderly lines before the teller windows, their conversations a low murmur beneath the soft classical music playing overhead. Marcus took his place at the end of the shortest line, his hands resting comfortably at his sides. He had driven 30 miles to reach this particular branch, the closest one to his small apartment on the outskirts of town. Behind the counter, a young man with carefully styled blonde hair and a name tag reading Kyle Hutchins processed transactions with mechanical efficiency. His pressed white shirt and striped tie spoke of someone eager to project professionalism, though his expression suggested boredom with the routine. When Marcus reached the front of the line, Kyle barely glanced up from his computer screen. "How can I help you?" Kyle said, his fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "I need to access my account," Marcus replied quietly. "I have some documents to update." Kyle's eyes flicked to Marcus's worn jacket and scuffed boots, a subtle shift in his expression suggesting immediate judgment. "Account number," he said flatly. Marcus recited the numbers from memory, his voice steady and clear. Kyle typed them in, his brow furrowing slightly as information populated his screen. He leaned forward, studying the monitor with increased interest. "This account has been flagged for verification," Kyle announced, his voice carrying a note of suspicion. "It says here you're claiming veterans' benefits." "I'm not claiming anything," Marcus said evenly. "I'm a veteran." Kyle's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced over his shoulder toward a glass-walled office at the back of the bank, where a woman in a navy blazer sat reviewing paperwork. "Right," Kyle said, drawing out the word. "Well, we've had some issues lately with people trying to access accounts they shouldn't. I'm going to need to verify your identity." "I have my identification," Marcus said, reaching for his wallet. "I'll need more than that," Kyle interrupted. He stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "Stay here." Marcus watched as Kyle crossed the bank floor toward the office, his stride purposeful and self-important. Through the glass walls, Marcus could see Kyle speaking to the woman in the navy blazer, gesturing back toward the counter. The woman looked up, her sharp features settling into an expression of mild annoyance. She rose from her desk, smoothing her blazer, and followed Kyle back across the lobby. Veronica Brightwell, her name tag read, branch manager. She approached the counter with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Sir," she said, her tone suggesting she was doing Marcus a favor by addressing him at all. "Kyle tells me there's a problem with your account verification." "There's no problem," Marcus replied. "I'm simply trying to access my account." Veronica's eyes swept over him, taking in every detail of his appearance. Her smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "I'm sure you understand we have to be careful," she said. "Identity theft is a serious issue, and we have a responsibility to protect our customers, especially when it comes to accounts with veterans' benefits attached." "Before we go further," Marcus said, his voice carrying the same steady calm, "drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've encountered veterans in your community who deserve more respect." "I provided my identification," Marcus continued. "What else do you need?" Veronica glanced at Kyle, who had positioned himself beside her with his arms crossed. "Well," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing edge, "the thing is, we've had several incidents recently. People coming in here, claiming to be veterans, trying to access benefits they haven't earned. I'm sure you can understand our caution." "I can provide additional documentation," Marcus said quietly. "That would be helpful," Veronica replied. "Because honestly, looking at your account history and your—" She paused, letting her gaze travel over his worn clothing once more, presentation. "I have to say I'm skeptical. Real veterans usually carry themselves differently. They have a certain bearing." The words hung in the air between them. Around the bank, other customers had begun to notice the exchange, conversations trailing off as attention shifted toward the counter. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the marble surface, his expression unchanged. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the back of the bank, a phone rang twice before someone answered it. "I serve my country," Marcus said, each word measured and clear. "That service is documented. My account is legitimate. I'm asking you to process my request." Veronica's smile tightened, losing any pretense of warmth. She straightened her posture, her hand moving to rest on the counter between them like a barrier. "Sir," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry across the lobby, "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. There are other customers waiting, and until you can provide proper verification, I cannot process any transactions on this account." Marcus didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on Veronica's face, steady and unblinking. "I have provided proper verification," he said. "My identification matches the account information. You're choosing not to accept it." A flush crept up Veronica's neck, mottling her carefully applied makeup. Kyle shifted beside her, emboldened by her presence. "Look, man," Kyle interjected, his voice carrying an edge of aggression. "We see this all the time. People think they can waltz in here, throw around the veteran card, and expect special treatment. It doesn't work that way." "I'm not asking for special treatment," Marcus replied, his voice never rising above its calm, measured tone. "I'm asking to access my own account." Veronica held up one manicured hand, silencing Kyle with a gesture. She leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening into something like contempt. "Let me be frank with you," she said. "This bank serves a community with many genuine veterans, real heroes who sacrificed for this country. And frankly, they don't come in here looking like," she gestured vaguely at Marcus, "well, like someone who's had a rough time. They have pride in their service. They present themselves with dignity." Behind them, an elderly woman in line gasped audibly. A young couple near the door had stopped their conversation, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. The classical music continued its gentle loop, utterly at odds with the tension crackling through the air. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his composed exterior. How a veteran presents themselves has nothing to do with the validity of their service, he said quietly. Veronica straightened, crossing her arms over her blazer. "In my experience," she said, "real veterans are proud to talk about their service. They don't hide it. They don't show up in—" She glanced pointedly at his worn boots, work clothes, acting mysterious about documentation. "So why don't you tell me, Mr. Aldridge, if that's even your real name, what exactly did you do in the military?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several customers had now formed a loose semicircle behind Marcus, no longer pretending not to watch. A middle-aged man in a business suit muttered something to his companion, his expression skeptical. Near the ATM machines, a young woman had her phone out, though whether to record or simply check messages was unclear. "I don't know you my service record," Marcus said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of something harder now. "My account information is sufficient for this transaction." Kyle snorted, a sound of derision that carried across the quiet bank. "Come on," he said. "If you were really some kind of hero, you'd be happy to tell us about it. Instead, you're dodging the question. That's pretty telling, don't you think?" Veronica nodded, her expression triumphant. "Exactly," she said, "which is why I'm going to have to insist you leave the premises. If you truly have a legitimate claim to this account, you can return with proper military documentation. Discharge papers, service records, something beyond a driver's license that anyone could have." "I shouldn't need anything beyond my identification," Marcus said. His hands remained flat on the counter, but the knuckles had gone white with pressure. "You're creating obstacles that don't exist in your own policies." "My bank, my policies," Veronica shot back. "And right now, my policy is protecting our genuine veteran customers from fraud. So unless you can prove, right here, right now, that you actually serve, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The elderly woman who had gasped earlier stepped forward slightly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "This doesn't seem right." The young man showed his identification. Veronica's head snapped toward her. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a banking security matter. I assure you, we have procedures for exactly this type of situation." "What type of situation?" Marcus asked quietly. "A veteran trying to access his own account." "An alleged veteran," Veronica corrected sharply. "And honestly, the more you resist providing proof, the more suspicious this becomes. Kyle," she turned to the young teller, "please call Raymond up from the parking lot. I think we may need security to escort this gentleman out." Kyle's face lit up with eager compliance. He reached for the phone on the counter, punching in numbers with barely concealed satisfaction. "Yeah, Raymond," he said into the receiver. "We need you inside. We got a situation at the main counter." Marcus stood perfectly still as Kyle hung up the phone. Through the tall windows, the afternoon sun had shifted, throwing the lobby into sharper relief. Every face turned toward him carried some mixture of curiosity, suspicion, or discomfort. The air conditioning hummed steadily, and somewhere in the back offices, a printer whirred to life. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent bank. "You're making assumptions based on appearance. You're judging service you know nothing about." Veronica's smile returned, cold and satisfied. "Then prove me wrong," she said. "Show me your service records. Tell me your unit, your deployment, your rank." Real veterans can do that without hesitation. The glass doors at the front of the bank swung open, and a man in a security uniform entered, his hand resting casually on the radio, clipped to his belt. Raymond Ortega had worked security at Cresthaven Community Bank for 3 years, long enough to recognize the difference between actual threats and management overreactions. As he approached the main counter, taking in the scene before him, his instincts told him this fell squarely into the latter category. The man standing at the counter radiated calm, his posture relaxed despite the obvious tension surrounding him. Raymond had dealt with genuine troublemakers, and this wasn't one. "Raymond," Veronica said sharply, turning to face him with obvious relief. "Thank you for coming so quickly. This individual is refusing to leave the premises after failing to provide adequate identification for his account." Raymond's eyes shifted to Marcus, taking in the worn clothing, the weathered face, the absolute stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" Raymond asked, his tone neutral. "No problem," Marcus replied evenly. "I provided my identification. The manager is refusing to accept it. He's claiming to be a veteran." Kyle interjected from behind Veronica, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But he won't provide any proof of service. He's probably trying to access someone else's account using stolen credentials." Raymond's jaw tightened slightly. He had served 4 years in the Army himself. Nothing glamorous, mostly stateside logistics, but enough to recognize certain things. The way this man held himself, the economy of movement, the controlled breathing, these were tells that couldn't easily be faked. "Have you run his identification through your system?" Raymond asked Veronica. "Of course we have," Veronica snapped. "The account exists, but that doesn't mean he's the legitimate owner. Anyone could have stolen those documents. Look at him, Raymond. Does he look like someone with a veteran's account?" Raymond felt heat rising in his chest, a familiar anger at assumptions made by people who had never worn a uniform. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "veterans come in all shapes and appearances. I'm not sure what you think one is supposed to look like." Veronica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I'm aware of that, Raymond. But when someone refuses to provide basic information about their service, when they act suspicious and evasive, we have a right to protect our customers in this institution. Now, are you going to do your job and remove him, or do I need to call the police?" The word police rippled through the gathered customers like a stone dropped in still water. The young woman near the ATM had her phone out now, definitely recording, the small device held at chest level but pointed directly at the counter. The man in the business suit had moved closer, his expression shifting from skepticism to something like concern. The elderly woman stood with her hand pressed to her chest, her face pale. Marcus's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. "I'm happy to wait while you call the police," he said. "In fact, I'd welcome it. They can verify my identity and my account ownership. Perhaps they'll have fewer preconceptions about what a veteran should look like." Veronica's face flushed dark red. "The absolute nerve," she hissed. "You stand there in your ratty clothes, refusing to answer basic questions, and you have the audacity to lecture me about preconceptions." "I've answered every legitimate question," Marcus replied. "You asked for identification, I provided it. You asked for my account number, I gave it. What you're asking now is for me to prove my worth to you based on your personal biases." Kyle stepped forward, his face twisted with indignation. "You know what?" he said loudly. "I'm calling this in. This is stolen valor. That's a federal crime." He reached for the phone again, his movements aggressive and theatrical. "Wait," Raymond said, holding up one hand. His radio crackled at his hip, a burst of static and garbled voices from the parking lot security station. "Let's just slow down a second. Sir," he turned to Marcus, "if you could just tell us what branch you served in, what years, that would help clear this up." Marcus met Raymond's eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition perhaps, or an understanding. "I could tell you that," Marcus said quietly, "but I shouldn't have to. My identification is valid. My account is legitimate. What's happening here isn't about verification. It's about judgment." The young woman with the phone moved closer, her voice cutting across the tension. "I'm recording this," she announced. "This whole thing, just so everyone knows." Veronica whirled on her. "You need to put that away right now," she demanded. "This is private bank business. This is a public space," the young woman countered, "and you're publicly humiliating this man. People should see this." Kyle moved around the counter, his face red with anger. "You don't understand what's happening here," he said to the gathering crowd. "This guy is trying to scam the bank. He's probably one of those homeless people who hangs around pretending to be a veteran for sympathy." "That's enough," Raymond said sharply, surprising himself with the force in his voice. "Kyle, get back behind the counter. Now." Kyle stopped, looking to Veronica for support. She hesitated, clearly torn between backing her employee and maintaining control of the situation. The bank had gone almost completely silent. Every transaction halted, every conversation stopped. Even the classical music seemed to have faded into the background, drowned out by the weight of collective attention. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket, and Raymond's hand instinctively moved toward his radio before he caught himself. Marcus pulled out a battered wallet, older than his jacket, the leather cracked and faded. From it, he extracted a business card, placing it carefully on the counter. "If you're going to call the police," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the hushed lobby, "you might want to call this number as well, just in case you need someone to verify my identity." Veronica snatched up the card, her eyes scanning it quickly. Her expression shifted, confusion replacing certainty for just a moment before contempt reasserted itself. "This is a Pentagon number," she said flatly. "You expect me to believe you have contacts at the Pentagon. I expect you to do your job," Marcus replied, "which is to verify legitimate account holders, not to create obstacles based on how someone dresses or whether they meet your personal standards of what a veteran should be." Veronica stared at the business card in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly with barely contained fury. The embossed seal of the Department of Defense gleamed under the fluorescent lights, professional and official in a way that momentarily unsettled her certainty. She turned the card over, finding only a name and direct line, no other context. Her eyes flicked back to Marcus, searching his face for signs of deception, for anything that would confirm her suspicions and justify her actions. "Fine," she said abruptly, her voice tight. "I'll call this number. And when it turns out to be fake or disconnected, or some friend of yours playing along with your little scam, I'm having you arrested. Kyle, get the police on the line anyway. Tell them we have a potential fraud situation." Kyle's face brightened with vindictive pleasure as he reached for the phone. Raymond shifted uncomfortably, his hand still resting on his radio, his eyes moving between Marcus and his manager with growing unease. The gathered customers had formed a tighter circle now, the elderly woman whispering urgently to the man in the business suit. The young woman with her phone held steady, capturing every moment. Veronica pulled out her cell phone, punching in the numbers from the card with sharp, angry jabs of her finger. She held it to her ear, her other hand gripping the edge of the counter. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Her expression began to shift toward triumph, ready to declare the number invalid. Then someone answered. Office of General Patricia Kensington, a crisp voice said on the other end. How may I direct your call? Veronica's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She stammered, then recovered her composure. This is Veronica Brightwell, branch manager of Cresthaven Community Bank. I'm calling to verify the identity of someone claiming to have military credentials. There was a brief pause on the other end. What is the individual's name? The voice asked, professional but suddenly cooler. Marcus Aldridge, Veronica said, her eyes locked on Marcus's face, searching for any flicker of concern. He's attempting to access an account here, and we have reason to believe he may be committing fraud. Another pause, longer this time. The sound of papers shuffling came through the line, then the click of a keyboard. I'm going to need you to hold, please, the voice said. Do not disconnect this call. The line went silent except for a faint hum. Veronica lowered the phone slightly, her expression uncertain now. They're checking, she announced to the room, as if this somehow vindicated her position. We'll know soon enough. Kyle had the bank's landline pressed to his ear, nodding along to whatever the emergency dispatcher was telling him. Yeah, he was saying, we need an officer to come down here. We have someone trying to access an account fraudulently. He's claiming to be a veteran, but can't provide proper documentation. His eyes darted to Marcus, hungry for validation. The business-suited man stepped forward, his voice carrying authority. Excuse me, he said, addressing Veronica. I'm Theodore Winters, attorney. I've been watching this entire exchange, and I have to say, this seems highly irregular. This gentleman has provided valid identification. By what legal standard are you refusing him access to his account? Veronica's head snapped toward him. Sir, this is a banking security matter. We have protocols. Protocols that allow you to discriminate based on appearance, Theodore countered. Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what this looks like. I've seen his identification from here. It appears legitimate. You're creating additional requirements that seem arbitrary at best. This doesn't concern you, Veronica said sharply. Actually, Theodore replied, pulling out his own business card. When I witness what appears to be potential discrimination and harassment in a public space, it very much concerns me. I'm happy to provide my contact information to Mr. Aldridge should he need representation. Marcus's expression remained unchanged, but he gave Theodore the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Raymond watched the exchange with growing discomfort, his earlier certainty about following orders now completely eroded. He had seen enough in his years in security to recognize when a situation was heading in the wrong direction. Ma'am, Raymond said quietly to Veronica, I really think we should wait to hear back on that call before we escalate this further. Veronica ignored him, her attention fixed on her phone as it suddenly came back to life. The voice on the other end was different now, deeper, with an unmistakable note of command. This is General Patricia Kensington, the voice said. To whom am I speaking? Veronica straightened instinctively, some ingrained response to authority asserting itself despite her anger. General, this is Veronica Brightwell, branch manager at Cresthaven Community Bank. I'm calling about a Marcus Aldridge who's attempting to access an account here. We have concerns about his identity. Concerns about his identity, the general repeated, her tone dropping several degrees. What precisely are these concerns, Ms. Brightwell? Veronica glanced at Marcus, then away, suddenly finding it difficult to articulate her suspicions under the weight of that voice. He's not presenting himself as we would expect a veteran to present. He's evasive about his service. He doesn't look like someone who would have a veteran's account. Doesn't look like, the general repeated slowly, and now there was something dangerous in her voice, something that made Veronica's hand shake slightly. Ms. Brightwell, I'm going to ask you a very simple question, and I want a very simple answer. Has Marcus Aldridge provided you with valid government-issued identification? Yes, but... No buts. The general cut her off sharply. Has his identification been verified against your banking system and found to match his account? Yes, however. Then on what possible grounds? The general's voice rose slightly. Controlled but sharp as a blade. Are you refusing him access to his own account and threatening him with police action? The bank had gone completely silent. Even Kyle had lowered the phone from his ear, sensing something shifting in the atmosphere. The young woman's phone continued recording, capturing Veronica's face as it slowly drained of color. We have to protect against fraud, Veronica said weakly. By harassing a decorated veteran, the general said, and now her voice carried across the phone loud enough that several nearby customers could hear it. By judging his worth based on his clothing and demanding he prove himself to you in ways not required by any banking regulation. Veronica's throat worked silently, trying to form words that wouldn't come. The phone felt heavy in her hand, the general's presence on the other end like a physical weight pressing down on her certainty. Around her, the bank seemed to close in, every pair of eyes fixed on her face, watching her composure crack in real time. General, Veronica began, then stopped. We were just trying to be thorough. There have been incidents of fraud. Have there been incidents specifically involving Marcus Aldridge's account? The general asked, her tone clipped and precise. No, but has Marcus Aldridge ever attempted fraudulent access to this or any other account at your institution? Not that I'm aware of, Veronica admitted, her voice barely above a whisper now. Then let me make something abundantly clear to you, Ms. Brightwell, the general said. Marcus Aldridge served this country with distinction for 22 years. He has seen combat in 3 separate theaters. He has earned commendations that I cannot discuss over an unsecured line. And right now, according to what you just told me, he is standing in your bank, being treated like a criminal because you don't approve of his jacket. The words hit like physical blows. Veronica's face went from pale to splotchy red, her free hand gripping the counter's edge so hard her knuckles went white. Kyle had gone completely still behind her, the phone dangling forgotten in his hand. Raymond took an unconscious step backward, distancing himself from the unfolding disaster. I didn't mean, Veronica tried again. What you meant, the general interrupted, is irrelevant. What you did is harass a veteran who came to your bank for routine business. What you did is make assumptions based on appearance and demand he justify his existence to you. What you did, Ms. Brightwell, is exactly the kind of discrimination that makes veterans feel unwelcome in their own communities. The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier moved closer to Marcus, her hand reaching out to touch his arm gently. I'm so sorry, she said softly. This is disgraceful. Marcus's expression remained calm, but he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. The young woman with the phone had moved to capture a better angle, and several other customers had pulled out their own devices. The scene was being documented from multiple perspectives now, preserved in digital memory for whatever would come next. Theodore Winters stepped fully into the space beside Marcus, his presence a silent statement of support. This is going viral, he said quietly, gesturing to the phones. By tonight, this will be everywhere. Veronica's eyes darted to the cameras, panic flashing across her face. Please, she said into the phone, her voice cracking slightly. I didn't know. He didn't tell us anything about his service. How were we supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know, the general replied, her voice cold as winter steel. You were supposed to treat him like any other customer with valid identification. You were supposed to do your job without prejudice. Instead, you chose to humiliate him publicly. Put him on the phone. What? Veronica said stupidly. Put Marcus on the phone, the general repeated. Now, Veronica extended the phone toward Marcus with a shaking hand, her face a mask of mortification. She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus took the phone, his movements unhurried. General, he said quietly. The change in his voice was subtle but distinct, a shift in tone that spoke of familiarity and respect. Several customers noticed it. The way his posture shifted slightly, some military bearing emerging from beneath the civilian exterior. Raymond definitely noticed it, recognizing the transformation of a soldier speaking to a superior officer, even years after leaving the service. Marcus, the general's voice came through clearly enough that those nearby could hear the warmth that replaced the ice from moments before. Are you all right? I'm fine. Mime, Marcus replied. Just trying to update some paperwork. Apparently, my appearance doesn't meet standards. Your appearance meets every standard that matters, the general said firmly. Have they called the police? Kyle's on the phone with him now, Marcus said, glancing at the young teller who still held the landline, though he'd stopped speaking into it. Good, the general said. When they arrive, I want you to file a formal complaint about this treatment. I'll be submitting one to their corporate headquarters myself. And Marcus, I'm about 40 minutes out. Don't let them chase you out of there before I arrive. Ma'am, you don't need to, Marcus began. I'm already on my way. The general cut him off. Had a meeting at the regional command. Was just wrapping up when your number came through. Consider this a slight detour. I haven't seen you in 6 months anyway. We're overdue. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, and something in his voice suggested this was an argument he knew he couldn't win. Put that woman back on the phone, the general instructed. Marcus extended the phone back to Veronica, who took it like she was accepting a live grenade. Yes, she said weakly. I will be at your bank in approximately 35 minutes, the general said. I strongly suggest you do not ask Mr. Aldridge to leave, do not continue to harass him, and do not attempt to justify your actions any further. When I arrive, we will have a very detailed conversation about proper treatment of veterans and exactly what kind of report I'll be filing with your corporate office. Do you understand me, Ms. Brightwell? Yes, General, Veronica whispered. Excellent, the general said. I'll see you shortly. The line went dead. Veronica lowered the phone slowly, staring at it as if it might offer some escape route from the situation she'd created. Around her, the bank remained frozen, every transaction abandoned, every conversation halted. The only sound was the steady hum of the air conditioning and the distant wail of sirens growing gradually louder as they approached from somewhere in the city. Kyle finally hung up his phone, moving back behind the counter with his earlier confidence completely evaporated. The police are on their way, he said quietly, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Perfect, Theodore said, his tone sardonic. They can take witness statements about this exemplary display of customer service. Raymond cleared his throat, then stepped forward to address Marcus directly. Sir, he said, would you like to have a seat while we wait? There are chairs by the window. I can get you some water. Marcus met his eyes, seeing the regret there, the understanding. Thank you, he said simply. I'll stand. The minutes that followed felt suspended in amber, time moving strangely as the bank remained locked in its tableau of tension and waiting. Veronica had retreated behind the counter, her face ashen, making low, urgent phone calls that Marcus couldn't quite hear. Kyle had disappeared entirely into the back offices, his earlier bravado replaced by the survival instinct of someone realizing they'd made a catastrophic error. Raymond stood near the entrance, his posture that of a man caught between duty and conscience, his eyes regularly finding Marcus as if checking to make sure he hadn't disappeared. The sirens grew louder, and then 2 police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their lights casting blue and red shadows across the bank's interior. 2 officers emerged, an older man with gray at his temples and a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. They approached the entrance with the careful alertness of people responding to a fraud call, not knowing what situation they might encounter. Raymond met them at the door, his security badge visible, speaking in low tones and gesturing back toward the counter where Marcus still stood. The older officer, his nameplate reading Sergeant Dawson, nodded as he listened, his eyes scanning the scene and taking in the customers with their phones, the elderly woman still standing protectively near Marcus, the attorney with his business card already in hand. All right, Sergeant Dawson said as he approached, his voice carrying the worn patience of someone who'd seen too many unnecessary calls. I understand we have a dispute about account access. Who called us in? I did, Veronica said, emerging from behind the counter with an attempt at recovered authority. This man was attempting to access an account under suspicious circumstances. He refused to provide adequate documentation of his identity. Ma'am, he provided his driver's license. Raymond interjected quietly. It matched the account information in our system. Dawson's eyes shifted to Raymond, reading the discomfort in the security guard's posture. Is that correct, officer? He asked formally. Raymond, Dawson said, his voice gentle. We go back a ways. Just tell me what happened here. Raymond's shoulders dropped slightly. Sir, this gentleman came in to handle routine banking business. He provided valid identification. The manager and the teller questioned whether he was really a veteran based on his appearance. They demanded additional proof beyond what's normally required. When he couldn't produce it immediately, they threatened to have him removed and called you. Dawson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. He turned to Marcus, his evaluation quick and professional. Sir, may I see your identification, please? Marcus handed over his license without comment. Dawson examined it carefully, then looked up at Marcus's face, comparing the image to the man before him. This is valid, he said. Current address, recent photo. And this matches the account information. It does, Raymond confirmed. The younger officer, whose nameplate read Officer Chun, had been watching the interaction with growing understanding. She stepped forward, addressing Veronica directly. Ma'am, what specific policy did this gentleman violate that required calling law enforcement? Veronica's mouth opened and closed. He was evasive, she finally managed. He wouldn't answer questions about his service. It seemed suspicious. Suspicious how Officer Chin pressed. Did he threaten anyone? Did he attempt to access accounts other than his own? Did he present fraudulent documents? No, but the way he was acting. Ma'am, Sergeant Dawson interrupted gently but firmly. Having someone dress casually and decline to discuss their personal history isn't a crime. Having a bank account while looking like you've had a hard day isn't illegal. What you've described to me isn't suspicious activity. It's just someone you didn't approve of. Theodore stepped forward, presenting his card to Sergeant Dawson. Officer, I'm an attorney, and I witnessed this entire exchange. This gentleman was subjected to discriminatory treatment based solely on his appearance. He was publicly humiliated, accused of fraud without basis, and threatened with arrest for attempting to conduct legitimate business. Dawson accepted the card, glancing at it before looking back to Marcus. Sir, would you like to file a complaint about your treatment here? Before Marcus could answer, the elderly woman spoke up, her voice stronger now. I saw everything, officer. They treated this poor man terribly. Accused him of lying about being a veteran. Said he didn't look right. Demanded he prove himself in ways they never ask of anyone else. It was shameful. Several other customers murmured agreement. The young woman with her phone held it up slightly. I have video of most of it, she offered. Multiple angles. Other people were recording too. Officer Chen's eyebrows rose. You recorded the interaction. Ma'am, we're in a public space where he was being publicly accused of crimes, Theodore interjected. The recording is completely legal. Dawson sighed, the sound of a man who could already see how this would play out. Ms. Brightwell, I'm going to be direct with you. You called us here for what appears to be a case of you not liking how a customer looks. That's not police business. That's discrimination, and you're lucky if this gentleman doesn't pursue legal action. There's more to it, Veronica said desperately. A general is on her way here. She confirmed his service, but she also seemed very angry. We might need police presence when she arrives. A general is coming here, Dawson repeated slowly. Because you harassed a veteran. She said she was filing complaints, Veronica said. With corporate, with everyone. She sounded threatening. She sounded like someone standing up for a soldier who was being mistreated. Officer Chun said, her tone cool. That's not a police matter either, ma'am. That's consequences for your actions. Marcus finally spoke, his voice cutting through the conversation with quiet authority. Officers, I don't wish to file charges. I came here to handle banking business, nothing more. If the manager will now allow me to complete that business, I'll consider the matter closed as far as law enforcement is concerned. Dawson studied Marcus for a long moment, recognition of something familiar in the older man's bearing. You're military, he said. Not a question. "22 years," Marcus confirmed. "Branch. Marines." Dawson nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "My son's in the Marines. Second deployment." He glanced at Veronica, and his voice went hard. "Ma'am, you should be ashamed of yourself. This man served his country, and you treated him like garbage because his boots weren't shiny enough." Veronica's face crumpled slightly, but she said nothing. Kyle emerged from the back office, saw the police, and went pale. Raymond stepped forward again. "Sir," he said to Marcus, "I apologize. For not speaking up sooner, for not doing more. I knew this was wrong, and I should have said something earlier." Marcus met his eyes. "Your army," he said. Raymond nodded. "For years. Logistics. You spoke up when it mattered," Marcus said simply. "That's enough." Outside, another vehicle pulled into the parking lot. A black SUV with government plates that caught the afternoon sun. The black SUV rolled to a stop in a spot directly in front of the bank's entrance, its presence commanding attention despite the lack of sirens or lights. Through the tall windows, everyone inside could see the driver's door open, and a woman in full military dress uniform emerged, her movements precise and purposeful. Even at a distance, the stars on her shoulders caught the light, announcing her rank before she'd taken 3 steps toward the building. General Patricia Kensington stood perhaps 5'7", but she carried herself with the authority of someone much larger. Her uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with exact precision, her shoes polished to a mirror shine. She was in her mid-50s, her dark hair silvered at the temples and pulled back in a regulation bun, her face lined with years of command and the weight of decisions most people would never have to make. As she approached the entrance, her expression was controlled, professional, and absolutely furious. Raymond moved instinctively to open the door for her, some deep-seated recognition of rank overriding everything else. The general gave him a brief nod of acknowledgement as she entered, her eyes immediately finding Marcus across the lobby. For just a moment, something softened in her expression, a flash of concern quickly buried under military bearing. Then her gaze swept the rest of the bank, taking in Sergeant Dawson and Officer Chun, the gathered customers with their phones, Theodore standing beside Marcus like legal counsel, and finally landing on Veronica behind the counter. "Sergeant," the general said, addressing Dawson with the easy authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm General Patricia Kensington. I believe you responded to a call about this situation." "Yes, ma'am," Dawson said, straightening unconsciously. "We did, though I have to say, ma'am, it appears to be a misunderstanding that didn't require police response." "A misunderstanding," the general repeated, her voice carrying across the silent bank. She began walking toward the counter, her stride measured and deliberate. "Is that what we're calling it when a veteran with valid identification is publicly accused of fraud, threatened with arrest, and humiliated in front of a dozen witnesses?" Veronica took an involuntary step backward. "General, I can explain. You'll remain silent until I ask you a direct question." The general cut her off, her voice sharp as a blade. "Right now, I'm gathering information. Sergeant, what did you find when you investigated this call?" Dawson glanced at his notepad, though Marcus suspected he didn't need to. "We found that Mr. Aldridge presented valid identification that matched his account information. We found that he was denied service based on subjective judgments about his appearance. We found multiple witnesses who observed discriminatory treatment. And we found video evidence of the entire interaction." "Video evidence," the general said, and now a hint of grim satisfaction entered her voice. "Good. Officer Chun, do you have anything to add?" Chun nodded. "Ma'am, in my assessment, Mr. Aldridge was subjected to treatment that appears to violate both banking regulations regarding customer service and potentially state anti-discrimination laws. The manager explicitly stated she didn't believe he looked like a veteran and demanded proof beyond standard identification requirements." The general turned her full attention to Veronica, and the temperature in the bank seemed to drop several degrees. "Ms. Brightwell," she said, her voice deceptively calm, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Marcus Aldridge is not just a veteran. He's a decorated Marine with 22 years of service. He served 3 combat tours. He earned a Silver Star for valor in Iraq and a Bronze Star with Valor Device in Afghanistan. He saved the lives of 6 fellow Marines under direct enemy fire. He has scars on his body from shrapnel that still sets off metal detectors. And today, he came to your bank to update some paperwork, and you treated him like a criminal. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. Veronica's face had gone from red to white, her hands gripping the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Around the lobby, customers stood transfixed, some with hands over their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. "I didn't know," Veronica whispered. "You didn't ask," the general corrected sharply. "You made assumptions. You decided that because he wasn't wearing a uniform, because his clothes were worn, because he didn't perform his service history for your entertainment, that he must be lying. Tell me, Ms. Brightwell, how exactly is a veteran supposed to look?" Veronica opened her mouth, but no words came out. Cal had gone even paler, pressed against the back wall, as if trying to disappear into it. The general turned to address the entire room, her voice carrying clearly. "I want everyone here to understand something. Veterans are not a monolith. They don't all look the same. They don't all dress the same. Some struggle with employment. Some deal with invisible wounds that make simple tasks difficult. Some prefer to keep their service private because they've seen things they don't want to relive for strangers. Judging them, demanding they prove their worth to you, treating them as suspects rather than the citizens they fought to protect, that is unconscionable." She turned back to Marcus, and her voice gentled. "Marcus, you should never have been put through this. I'm sorry it happened, and I'm sorry you had to call me." "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "you didn't have to come all this way." "The hell I didn't," the general replied, and several customers suppressed gasps at the blunt profanity from such an authority figure. "You serve under my command for 8 years. You saved lives, including my nephew's in Helmand Province. You think I was going to let some banker with delusions of authority disrespect you without consequence?" Theodore stepped forward, offering his card to the general. "Ma'am, I'm Theodore Winter's attorney. I witnessed this entire situation. If Mr. Aldridge wishes to pursue legal action, I'd be happy to represent him pro bono." The general accepted the card, examining it briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Winters. I suspect corporate will want to settle this very quietly and very quickly once they see the video evidence and my official report." She turned to Officer Chun. "Officer, I'd like a copy of your incident report for my files." "Of course, ma'am," Chun replied. "I'll make sure you receive it." The general's attention returned to Veronica, and her voice went cold again. "Now, Ms. Brightwell, you're going to process Mr. Aldridge's banking request immediately and without any further delays or requirements. You're going to do so with professionalism and courtesy. And then you're going to provide me with the contact information for your regional director and your corporate headquarters, because they're going to want to get ahead of this before it becomes a national news story." Veronica nodded mutely, her hands shaking as she moved to her computer terminal. Kyle remained frozen against the wall, looking like he might be sick. The elderly woman who had stood up for Marcus earlier approached the general tentatively. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you for coming. What they did to this man was terrible, and I'm glad someone with authority is holding them accountable." The general's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. If more people spoke up like you did, situations like this might happen less often." Veronica's fingers trembled over the keyboard as she pulled up Marcus's account, her earlier confidence completely shattered. The bank remained silent, except for the clicking of keys and the occasional shuffle of feet as customers repositioned themselves to better witness the resolution. The general stood with her arms crossed, watching Veronica's every movement with the intensity of someone conducting a field inspection. Her presence dominated the space, making the spacious lobby feel suddenly smaller. "What paperwork did you need to update, Mr. Aldridge?" Veronica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Beneficiary information," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm adding my niece as a secondary. Her name is Sophie Brennan. I have her social security number and address information." Veronica nodded mechanically, pulling up the appropriate forms on her screen. "I'll She cleared her throat. I'll need you to verify your identity for the account changes. He already did that, the general said sharply. An hour ago, when he first walked in here. Bank policy requires, Veronica began, then stopped as the general's expression darkened. She looked down at her screen, typed rapidly, then looked back up. Actually, his earlier verification is still valid in our system. I can proceed with the changes now. If you could just provide the information, Mr. Aldrich. Marcus recited his niece's details from memory, his voice steady and clear. Veronica entered the information with shaking hands, double-checking each field multiple times. The process that should have taken 5 minutes stretched to 10 as her nervousness made her fumble through routine steps. Officer Chan had been taking notes throughout, her pen moving steadily across her pad. Sergeant Dawson stood near the entrance in quiet conversation with Raymond, both men occasionally glancing back at the scene unfolding at the counter. Theodore remained beside Marcus, a silent sentinel ensuring proper treatment, his presence alone enough to keep everything above board. The young woman who had been recording lowered her phone finally, though several other customers still had theirs raised. She approached the general tentatively. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said. "I'm Emma Hartfield. I'm a journalism student at the State University. I recorded most of this interaction. Would you be willing to make a statement for my campus news site?" The general considered this for a moment. "What's your editorial stance going to be?" she asked. "The truth," Emma replied, "that a veteran was discriminated against and publicly humiliated for no valid reason, and that you came here to set things right. People should know this happened." The general nodded slowly. "Send your questions to my office. The contact information is on the card I gave Ms. Brightwell. I'll provide a written statement within 48 hours. But you should know, Ms. Hartfield, this isn't about me. This is about how we treat veterans in our communities. That's the real story." Emma nodded, making notes. "Can I get a statement from you, Mr. Aldrich?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "I'd rather not," he said quietly. "I just wanted to handle my banking." "See," the general said, addressing the room at large. "That's what actual humility looks like. Not performing it for approval, not using it as a weapon. Just a man who served his country and wants to live his life quietly without being judged for his jacket." Kyle finally found his voice, stepping forward from a wall where he'd been pressed. "I want to apologize," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Mr. Aldrich, I was completely out of line. I made assumptions, and I was disrespectful, and I'm truly sorry." The general's eyes fixed on him like targeting lasers. "What's your name?" "Kyle Hutchins, ma'am," he said, standing straighter despite his obvious fear. "How long have you worked here, Mr. Hutchins?" 8 months, ma'am." "In those 8 months, have you received any training on customer service, on treating people with respect regardless of appearance, on basic human decency?" "Yes, ma'am," Kyle said miserably. "Then what happened today?" the general asked, her voice sharp. "Did you forget that training? Or did you simply decide it didn't apply to people you deem beneath you?" Kyle's face crumpled. "I don't know, ma'am. He looked like I thought." He stopped, unable to finish any of the sentences he started. "You thought he looked poor," the general supplied. "You thought he looked like someone you could dismiss. You thought his worn clothes meant he wasn't worthy of basic courtesy. And then you encouraged your manager's discrimination. You called the police on a man conducting legitimate business, and you participated in publicly humiliating someone who has sacrificed more for this country than you can possibly imagine." Tears were running down Kyle's face now. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize to me," the general said. "Apologize to him." Kyle turned to Marcus, his face red and blotchy. "Mr. Aldrich, I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was wrong about everything, and I hope you can forgive me someday." Marcus studied the young man for a long moment. The bank held its collective breath, waiting to see how he would respond. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly. "You're young," he said. "You made a mistake. A serious one, but a mistake nonetheless. Learn from it. Treat people better. Remember that you can't judge someone's worth by their appearance or their circumstances. That's all I ask." The simplicity of the response seemed to hit Kyle harder than any harsh words could have. He nodded, unable to speak, and retreated back behind the counter. Veronica finished with the paperwork, printing out several forms and sliding them across the counter to Marcus. "If you could just sign here and here," she said, indicating the marked lines. Her voice had lost all its earlier authority, reduced to mechanical politeness. Marcus signed the documents efficiently, his signature flowing across the pages. Veronica processed them, stamped them, and entered final confirmations into her system. The entire transaction took less than 3 minutes, a stark contrast to the hour of conflict that had preceded it. "Is there anything else you need to complete today?" Veronica asked, and this time the question held no suspicion, only exhaustion. "No," Marcus said. "That's everything." "Then your changes have been processed and are effective immediately," Veronica said. She looked up at him, met his eyes for perhaps the first time since the general had arrived, and something in her broke. "I'm sorry," she said, and unlike Kyle's theatrical display, this apology came out raw and honest. "I was wrong. I judged you unfairly. I treated you terribly. I'm sorry." Marcus nodded once, accepting the apology without comment. He gathered his documents, folded them neatly, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. The general placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go get coffee," she said. "We have catching up to do, and I suspect you've had enough of this place for one day." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus agreed. As they turned toward the exit, Theodore handed Marcus his business card. "If corporate doesn't handle this appropriately," he said quietly, "call me. What happened here isn't something that should be brushed aside." Marcus pocketed the card. "Thank you," he said, "for speaking up." Theodore smiled slightly. "It's what we're supposed to do," he said. "Stand up when we see something wrong. You taught us that, all of you who served." The general and Marcus moved toward the exit, but before they could reach the doors, Sergeant Dawson stepped into their path. His hand went to his forehead in a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said formally, "thank you for coming, and thank you for your service." The general returned the salute with equal precision. "Thank you, Sergeant. Your handling of this situation was professional and fair. Your son is lucky to have you as a father." Dawson's face colored slightly with pride. "Thank you, ma'am." He turned to Marcus, extending his hand. "Sir, I'm sorry this happened to you. If you need anything from the department, any follow-up, you let us know." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Appreciated," he said simply. Officer Chin approached as well, her notepad closed. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, "I'll make sure this incident is documented thoroughly. If you change your mind about pressing charges, you have 60 days to file." "I won't change my mind," Marcus replied. "But thank you." Raymond stood by the door, his security badge catching the light. As Marcus and the general approached, he straightened, his own hand moving toward a salute before catching himself. "Sir," he said instead. "Semper Fi." Marcus paused, something shifting in his expression. "Semper Fi," he replied quietly. "You served honorably today, Raymond. Speaking up when it mattered. That takes courage." Raymond's eyes glistened slightly. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said. "You spoke up," Marcus said. "That's what counts." He extended his hand, and Raymond shook it, the grip of two men who understood something about duty and conscience. The elderly woman who had defended Marcus earlier hurried forward, her purse clutched in both hands. "Young man," she said, and despite Marcus being in his late 40s, something about her tone made the address seem natural. "I want you to know that not everyone in this community thinks like those two behind that counter. Most of us appreciate your service. Most of us would never treat you that way." "I know, ma'am," Marcus said gently. "Thank you for standing up for me. That meant more than you might think." She patted his arm, then turned to the general. "You raised them right," she said. "Your soldiers, I mean. He's a good man." The general smiled, the expression transforming her stern features. "I didn't raise him, ma'am. The Marines did that, but I was privileged to command him for part of his service. He's one of the finest men I've ever known." The gathering of customers had begun to disperse, but several lingered, clearly wanting to express something. A middle-aged man in work clothes approached, his hands rough with calluses. "My brother was in Iraq," he said to Marcus. He didn't make it home. Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming back. Marcus's expression tightened briefly, pain flashing across his features before he controlled it. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly. What was his name? Daniel Ramsey, the man replied. Lance Corporal, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. I didn't serve with him, Marcus said, but I knew men like him. Good man. Their sacrifice mattered. The man nodded, his throat working. Thank you for saying that. He shook Marcus's hand and stepped back, wiping at his eyes. Emma, the journalism student, had been recording again, capturing these quieter moments. She lowered her phone as the general glanced at her. This is the story, Emma said softly. Not just what happened with the bank, but this. How people react when they know the truth. Write it well, the general instructed. Write it fairly. And make sure people understand that veterans are all around them, living quiet lives, not asking for special treatment. Just basic respect. I will, ma'am, Emma promised. She turned to Marcus. Thank you for your service, sir. And I'm sorry for what you went through today. Marcus nodded his acknowledgement, clearly ready to leave. The general seemed to sense his exhaustion and placed her hand on his shoulder again, gently steering him toward the exit. As they pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon heat, the cool air conditioning giving way to September warmth, Marcus took a deep breath as if cleansing himself of the experience. Behind them, through the windows, they could see Veronica on the phone, her face pale and anxious. Kyle had disappeared again, probably to the bathroom or break room, unable to face the aftermath of his actions. Other customers were conducting their business now, the normal rhythm of the bank slowly reasserting itself, though conversations were animated and phones were still out as people shared what they'd witnessed. Your truck, the general said, more statement than question, gesturing to a battered Ford pickup in the far corner of the lot. Yes, ma'am, Marcus confirmed. Follow me to the coffee shop on 5th Street, she said, the one near the old courthouse. You know it. I know it, Marcus replied. Good, the general said. She started toward her SUV, then paused and turned back. Marcus, she said, her voice gentler now. I'm proud of how you handled yourself in there. Staying calm, maintaining your dignity, not letting them provoke you into anything that would have justified their suspicions. That took more discipline than most people realize. 22 years of training, ma'am, Marcus said with the ghost of a smile. It shows, the general replied. It always has. She studied him for a moment longer. How have you really been? The last time we talked, you were still adjusting to civilian life. Some days are better than others, Marcus admitted. Today wasn't one of the better ones, obviously. No, the general agreed. But you survived it. You always do. She paused, then added quietly, you don't have to keep proving yourself, Marcus. Not to me, not to anyone. What you did, who you are, that's already established. You earned your rest. Doesn't always feel that way, Marcus said, his voice low. I know, the general said. That's why we're getting coffee. That's why I check in. That's why I wanted to call me more than once every 6 months. She softened her tone. You're not alone in this transition, Marcus. You have people who care about you, who remember what you did, who want to see you succeed in this next chapter. Marcus's jaw worked briefly, emotion threatening to break through his controlled exterior. Yes, ma'am, he managed finally. Good, the general said briskly, returning to her command voice. Now go get in that truck and follow me. I'm buying the coffee, and you're going to tell me about Sophie. How's she doing in college? She's doing well, Marcus said, gratitude evident in his voice for the change of subject. Dean's list last semester. Wants to be a teacher, just like her uncle, the general said. Always wanting to help people, to teach them, to make them better. The Marines lost a hell of an instructor when you retired. They have plenty of good ones still serving, Marcus replied. True, the general said, but they only had one Marcus Aldrich. She smiled at him, genuine warmth breaking through the military bearing. Coffee. Now, that's an order, gunnery sergeant. The old rank, used with affection rather than formality, seemed to settle something in Marcus. He straightened slightly, and for a moment, the weight he'd been carrying visibly lightened. Yes, ma'am, he said, and this time there was a hint of his old confidence in the words. Marcus climbed into his truck, the worn seat familiar and comfortable beneath him. The engine turned over with a reliable rumble, and he pulled out of the parking space, following the general's SUV as it navigated through the afternoon traffic. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, muscle memory guiding him through turns while his mind processed the events of the past hour. Through his rearview mirror, he could still see the bank, its glass facade reflecting the sky. Inside those walls, his life had been questioned, his service dismissed, his dignity challenged. And yet he felt oddly calm now. The storm passed, leaving only the quiet aftermath. The general's arrival had changed everything, but part of him wondered if it should have been necessary at all. In a better world, his identification would have been enough. In a better world, his appearance wouldn't have mattered. The coffee shop on 5th Street occupied the ground floor of a renovated brick building near the old courthouse, its large windows offering views of the tree-lined street. The general pulled into a spot directly in front, and Marcus found 2 spaces down. They emerged from their vehicles simultaneously, and the general waited on the sidewalk as Marcus approached. Inside, the shop was moderately busy with the late afternoon crowd. Students hunched over laptops. Business people conducted quiet meetings. A couple shared a pastry at a corner table. The scent of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air, comforting and familiar. The general ordered 2 black coffees and a couple of scones, waving off Marcus's attempt to pay, and they settled into a quiet booth near the back windows. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply sat, coffee cooling slightly between them, watching the street outside where ordinary life continued, unaware of what had transpired just blocks away. Finally, the general broke the silence. "How often does that happen?" she asked quietly. "People questioning your service, treating you like you're not legitimate." Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not often," he said. "Most people don't ask. Most people don't care one way or another. But when it happens," he paused, "it cuts deeper than you'd think. Because you can't exactly defend yourself without sounding like you're bragging or making it up anyway." The general's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have to defend yourself at all. The fact that you served should be enough. The fact that you're a human being should be enough." Marcus sipped his coffee, grateful for something to do with his hands. "The world doesn't work that way, ma'am. People make judgments. They see the truck, the clothes, the fact that I'm not wearing a uniform or covered in patriotic gear, and they make assumptions. Those assumptions are their failure, not yours," the general said firmly. She leaned forward slightly, her command presence softening into something more personal. "Marcus, I need you to hear this. What happened today wasn't about you falling short of some standard. It was about their prejudices, their narrow view of what service looks like. You know that, right?" "Intellectually, yes," Marcus replied. Emotionally, he shrugged slightly. "It's harder to separate." The general nodded, understanding in her expression. "When did you last talk to someone from the VA?" she asked. "About the transition, about adjustment." "Few months ago," Marcus admitted. "They're helpful, but there's only so much talking can do. Most days I'm fine. I work construction, help Sophie with tuition, live quietly. It's just days like today that remind me how different civilian life is from what I knew." "Different doesn't mean wrong," the general said. "And struggling with the transition doesn't make you weak. Some of the strongest people I've ever commanded had the hardest time adjusting to civilian life. The skills that make you an excellent Marine don't always translate to a world that doesn't understand military culture." Marcus smiled faintly. "Is this where you tell me it gets easier?" The general smiled back. "No, because I'm not going to lie to you. It stays complicated, but you learn to navigate it better. You find people who understand. You build a new kind of life that honors what you were while accepting what you are now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only exists between people who've shared significant experiences. Outside, a family walked past, young children darting ahead of their parents, laughing and carefree. Marcus watched them, something complicated crossing his face. "That's what we fought for," the general said quietly, following his gaze. "Those kids, their ability to grow up without knowing war firsthand. Days like today make you question whether it was worth it, I know. But it was, Marcus. It always was. Even when the people we protected treat us like criminals, Marcus said, not quite a question. Even then, the general confirmed. Because we didn't serve for gratitude. We served because it needed to be done. The fact that some people are ignorant or prejudiced doesn't change the value of what we did. It just means we still have work to do helping people understand. Marcus broke off a piece of scone, considering her words. Sophie asked me about my service last week, he said. She's old enough now to understand more than the basic facts. She wanted to know what it was really like, what I really did. I didn't know how to answer her. What did you tell her? The general asked. That I served with good people, Marcus said. That we did difficult things because they needed doing. That I'm proud of my service, but don't need to relive it every day. She seemed satisfied with that. That's a good answer, the general said. Honest without being heavy. She doesn't need the details, Marcus. She just needs to know that part of your life meant something, shaped who you are, and that you're at peace with it. Most days I am, Marcus said. Then something like today happens, and I wonder if I'll ever really fit in this world again. The general reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You fit, she said firmly. You just fit in a world that doesn't always recognize what it has. But that's changing. Slowly, too slowly, but it's changing. People like that young woman recording, like the attorney who stood beside you, like Raymond finding his courage, they're part of that change. I hope you're right, Marcus said. I am right, the general replied with absolute conviction. I've been doing this long enough to see the shifts. More people are aware now. More people are willing to stand up. What happened today was awful, but it also showed you how many people were on your side. Remember that part too. Marcus nodded slowly, something easing in his shoulders. Thank you for coming, ma'am. You didn't have to drop everything. Yes, I did, the general said simply. You want to mind, Marcus? That doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It doesn't end when you retire. It doesn't end ever. When one of my Marines needs me, I show up. That's the deal. Semper Fidelis, Marcus said quietly. Always faithful, the general agreed. To the core, to each other, to the mission. That includes making sure you're okay when civilians fail you. She withdrew her hand and picked up her coffee. Now, tell me more about Sophie. What's she studying? What's her focus? I want details. Marcus allowed himself a genuine smile, the first since entering the bank hours ago. She's studying early childhood education, he said. Wants to work with at-risk kids from military families especially. Says she saw what transition was like for me and wants to help children going through similar things with their parents. The general's expression softened with pride and something like emotion. She's remarkable, she said. Just like her uncle. You raised her well, Marcus. I tried, Marcus said simply. After my sister died, it was the least I could do. Sophie gave me purpose when I needed it most. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from Sophie to mutual acquaintances still serving, to changes in the Corps, to the general's upcoming retirement in 2 years. The sun had dipped lower in the sky by the time Marcus and the general emerged from the coffee shop, the light taking on the golden quality of late afternoon. They stood beside their vehicles, neither quite ready to part ways despite having covered everything that needed saying. The general's phone had buzzed several times during their conversation, but she'd ignored it. Now she pulled it out, glancing at the screen, and her eyebrows rose slightly. Emma Hartfield has already posted her article, the general said. It's on the university news site, but it's being shared rapidly. She turned her phone so Marcus could see the headline. Local veteran faces discrimination at bank. Decorated general intervenes. That was fast, Marcus observed. Journalism students, the general said with a slight smile. They move quickly when they have a real story. She scrolled through the article, her expression approving. She wrote it fairly. Included context about veteran treatment, quoted several witnesses, even got a statement from Theodore Winters. This is good work. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she answered it, her tone shifting immediately to professional. General Kensington. She listened for a moment, her expression hardening. Yes, I'm aware of the incident. I was present. Another pause. I have video evidence from multiple sources, witness statements, and a police report. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your corporate office tomorrow morning. No, this is not something that can be handled with an apology and a gift card. One of your employees called the police on a decorated veteran for the crime of not looking prosperous enough. Marcus could hear the tinny sound of someone speaking rapidly on the other end. The general's expression remained stern. I don't care what your standard procedures are. Your standard procedures failed spectacularly today. I suggest you review the video evidence before you decide how you want to proceed. My report will be copied to the State Banking Commission and several veterans advocacy organizations. Good evening. She ended the call and looked at Marcus. That was their regional VP. Apparently word travels fast. You don't have to fight this battle for me, Marcus said quietly. The general's eyes flashed. I'm not fighting it for you. I'm fighting it because it needs fighting. What happened today happens too often to too many veterans who don't have a general's phone number in their wallet. If I can use my position to make this particular bank chain think twice before judging the next veteran, then I'm going to do exactly that. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you, he said simply. The general's expression softened. Go home, Marcus. Hug Sophie when she calls tonight, because she will call when she sees this story online. Take tomorrow off from work if you need to. And call me next week, not 6 months from now. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied. They shook hands formally, but the general pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. Take care of yourself, she said quietly. That's an order. I will, Marcus promised. He watched as she climbed into her SUV and pulled away, her vehicle disappearing into traffic. Then he got into his truck and headed home, the events of the day finally beginning to settle into something he could process and file away. The drive back to his small apartment took 40 minutes, mostly highway with the windows down and country music playing low on the radio. Marcus let the wind and music fill the cab, not thinking, just driving. By the time he pulled into his parking spot, the sun had set completely, the sky painted in deep purples and darkening blues. His apartment was modest, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a complex that had seen better days, but was well-maintained and affordable. Inside, everything was neat and organized, his Marine training evident in the precise way items were stored and surfaces cleared. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, hung his jacket on its hook, and moved to the small kitchen to start coffee. His phone rang before the pot had finished brewing. Sophie's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus smiled despite his exhaustion. He answered on the second ring. Uncle Marcus, Sophie's voice came through, tight with concern. I just saw the article online. Are you okay? What happened? I'm fine, sweetheart, Marcus assured her. Just a misunderstanding at the bank that got blown out of proportion. The article says they accuse you of fraud, Sophie said. They called the police on you. That's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination. It was handled, Marcus said gently. General Kensington came and sorted everything out. The bank is facing consequences. I'm okay, Sophie. You shouldn't have had to call the general, Sophie said, and Marcus could hear the tears in her voice. You shouldn't have to prove yourself to people like that. You served your country for 22 years. You earned better treatment than that. I know, Marcus said softly, and most people do treat me well. This was just one bad day with a couple of people who made poor judgments. It doesn't define how the world sees me. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Are you really okay? She asked. Not the automatic okay you always say. Really okay. Marcus considered lying, then decided she deserved the truth. It shook me, he admitted. Being accused like that, having my service questioned, standing there while people judged me. It brought up some things I thought I'd move past, but I'm processing it. I talked with the general for a while. I'll be fine. I'm coming home this weekend, Sophie announced. I don't care that I have papers due. I'm coming to see you. Sophie, you don't need to do that, Marcus protested. Yes, I do, Sophie said firmly, and Marcus heard echoes of his own stubbornness in her voice. You were there for me every single day after Mom died. You put your life on hold to raise me, to make sure I had stability and love and support. The least I can do is come home for a weekend when you've had a terrible day. Marcus felt emotion tighten his throat. Okay, he managed. I'd like that. I like that a lot. Good, Sophie said, her tone gentler now. I'll catch a bus Friday after my last class. We can have dinner at that Italian place you like, the one with the breadsticks. Sounds perfect, Marcus said. They talked for another 20 minutes, Sophie filling him in on her classes and her roommate's latest drama, normal conversation that grounded him back in the everyday rhythm of life. By the time they hung up, Marcus felt steadier, more centered. He poured his coffee and moved to the small living room, settling into his worn armchair by the window. Outside, the apartment complex was quiet, lights glowing in windows, the occasional car pulling in or out. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the drama that had played out across town that afternoon. His phone buzzed with a text from Theodore Winters. The law office had reviewed the video evidence and was prepared to represent him pro bono if he chose to pursue action. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back a simple response. "Thank you, but I think the general's handling of it is sufficient. I appreciate your support today." Theodore's response came quickly. "Anytime. You deserve better. If anything changes, the offer stands." Marcus set his phone aside and sipped his coffee, staring out at the darkening night. The day had started ordinarily enough, just a simple errand to update beneficiary paperwork. It had become something else entirely, something that had exposed prejudices and assumptions he'd hoped were fading in society. But it had also revealed something else. The people who stood up, who spoke out, who refused to let injustice pass unchallenged. Raymond finding his voice. The elderly woman defending a stranger. Theodore offering legal expertise. Officer Chin documenting everything properly. Emma telling the story. And the general dropping everything to drive to a bank and defend one of her Marines. Maybe that was the real story, Marcus thought. Not the discrimination, though that mattered and needed addressing, but the response to it. The collective decision by multiple people that what was happening was wrong and needed correction. The story broke nationally 2 days later. What had started as a university news article shared on social media exploded across major news networks, veteran advocacy websites, and countless personal platforms. Emma's video, combined with footage from other witnesses, had been viewed millions of times. The phrase "fake veteran" trended on social media for 48 hours, not as an accusation, but as a rallying cry against the kind of discrimination Marcus had faced. Marcus watched the coverage from his apartment with a mixture of discomfort and resignation. His face had been blurred in most videos at his request, his privacy protected even as his story became public property. But the message was clear and unambiguous. Judging veterans by their appearance was unacceptable, and the consequences for such discrimination would be severe. Cresthaven Community Bank's corporate office issued a formal apology within 36 hours. Veronica Brightwell was terminated. Kyle Hutchins was suspended pending additional training, his employment status to be reviewed in 90 days. The bank announced a comprehensive review of their customer service protocols and mandatory training for all employees on veteran sensitivity and anti-discrimination policies. They also made a substantial donation to 3 different veteran support organizations, though they carefully avoided admitting legal liability. The general's formal complaint, co-signed by 2 other high-ranking officers, went to the State Banking Commission, the Better Business Bureau, and the National Office of Veteran Affairs. Within a week, the Banking Commission announced an investigation into the branch's practices. Within 2 weeks, 3 other veterans came forward with their own stories of discrimination at the same branch, incidents that had gone unreported because they hadn't known how to fight back. Marcus sat in his apartment on a Thursday evening, Sophie on the couch beside him working on a paper, when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Aldridge," a warm voice said. "My name is Catherine Torres. I'm a new branch manager at Cresthaven Community Bank. I wanted to reach out personally to apologize for what happened to you, and to let you know about the changes we've implemented." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate the call," he said carefully. "I know an apology can't undo what you experienced," Catherine continued. "But I want you to know that what happened was completely unacceptable and doesn't represent the values we're working to uphold. We've completely restructured our customer service approach, and every employee has undergone extensive training on treating all customers with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance or circumstances. That's good to hear, Marcus said. If you're ever willing to come back to our branch, Catherine said, I'd like to personally handle any banking needs you might have. And if you're not comfortable with that, which I would completely understand, we can arrange for you to work with any other branch in our network with full support from corporate. I'll think about it, Marcus replied. Right now, I've moved my accounts to a credit union that specializes in veteran services. That's absolutely right, Catherine said. And honestly, probably a good choice. But Mr. Aldridge, I want you to know that your experience has changed things. Not just at our bank, but across the industry. We're hearing from other banks that are reviewing their own policies. Veteran advocacy groups are using your story to push for better protections. You made a difference. I just wanted to cash a check, Marcus said quietly. I know, Catherine replied, genuine regret in her voice. And that's exactly why this matters. You shouldn't have had to become a national story to receive basic respect. But since it happened, at least some good is coming from it. After the call ended, Sophie looked up from her laptop. That was the bank, she asked. New manager, Marcus confirmed, apologizing and explaining the changes. Do you believe they've really changed? Sophie asked. Marcus considered the question. I believe they're trying, he said. Whether it sticks long-term, that's harder to say. But at least for now, other veterans won't face what I faced. That's something. The following week, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a regional veterans conference. The general had recommended him, the organizers explained, believing his perspective on civilian transition and the challenges veterans face would be valuable. Marcus declined politely, not ready to make himself more public than he'd already become. But he appreciated being asked, appreciated being seen as someone with something worth sharing. Raymond called him one evening, his voice hesitant but sincere. I wanted you to know, he said, that I turned in my resignation at the bank. I couldn't keep working there after what happened, even with all the changes. But I got hired as a veterans outreach coordinator at the VA hospital, helping other vets navigate services, connecting them with resources. Your situation, what you went through, it made me realize I needed to be doing more. That's good work, Marcus told him. Important work. You'll be good at it. I hope so, Raymond said. And Marcus, thank you for handling everything with such dignity, for showing me what real courage looks like, even in civilian situations. Theodore Winters sent regular updates about the Banking Commission investigation and the various policy changes rippling through the financial industry. He remained convinced Marcus should pursue civil action, but respected his decision not to. The attorney had become something of an unexpected friend, occasionally meeting Marcus for coffee to discuss everything from legal developments to baseball scores. Emma's journalism career received a significant boost from her coverage. Multiple media outlets picked up her reporting, and she received offers from several major news organizations for internships. She stayed in touch with Marcus through occasional emails, always respectful of his privacy, but checking in to see how he was doing. Her follow-up pieces focused not on Marcus specifically, but on the broader issues of veteran treatment and discrimination, using his story as a launching point for deeper investigation. The elderly woman from the bank, whose name Marcus learned was Dorothy Brennan, sent him a handwritten letter. In careful script, she wrote about her late husband, a Korean War veteran who had struggled with similar treatment in his later years. She thanked Marcus for being brave enough to stand up, for allowing his story to be told, for making people think about how they treat veterans. Marcus kept the letter in his desk drawer, pulling it out occasionally when he needed reminding that the ordeal had meaning beyond his own experience. Sophie came home that weekend as promised, and they spent 2 days together, talking and eating and simply being in each other's presence. She met the general for lunch, the two of them ganging up on Marcus affectionately about his reluctance to accept help or recognition. Watching them together, Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a sense that despite everything, he had built something good in this civilian life. Family, found and chosen, people who cared and showed up and refused to let him face things alone. On Sunday evening, as Sophie packed to return to school, she hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not just for your service, but for how you handled everything this week. For staying true to yourself, even when people tried to make you feel small. I learned from good people," Marcus said, thinking of the general, of his fellow Marines, of the sister who had raised Sophie before her death. "Well, you taught me too," Sophie replied, "about dignity and strength and not letting other people define your worth. I'm trying to teach that to the kids I work with at my internship, that what other people think doesn't determine who they are." After Sophie left, Marcus stood in his quiet apartment, looking out at the evening sky. The story would fade eventually, he knew. News cycles moved on, public attention shifted, and life returned to normal rhythms. But the changes that had been set in motion would remain. Policies rewritten, employees trained, other veterans standing up because they'd seen that someone else had stood up first. Small ripples spreading outward in ways that were impossible to fully measure. His phone buzzed with a text from the general. Checking in. "How are you holding up with all the attention?" Marcus typed back, "Managing. Looking forward to things settling down." Her response came quickly. "They will. But you made a difference, Marcus. Never forget that. Proud of you. As always." Marcus smiled at the message, then set his phone aside. He made dinner, cleaned up, settled into his armchair with a book. Outside, the world continued spinning, people living their lives, some of them perhaps treating veterans a little better because of what had happened in a bank on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or share if you've witnessed similar courage in your own community. Stories like Marcus's remind us that respect and dignity should never depend on appearance, and that standing up for what's right can create change that reaches far beyond a single moment. Marcus Aldridge didn't set out to be a symbol or a catalyst for change. He just wanted to update his beneficiary information. But sometimes the most profound impacts come from the simplest acts of refusing to accept being treated as less than human. His quiet dignity in the face of discrimination, combined with the courage of those who stood beside him, proved that one person's story could spark a broader conversation about how we treat those who've served. And in the end, that was its own kind of service.